Hey, thank you, Debbie. I appreciate it. I'd like to thank everybody for attending this one. This is one of our webcasts in the series where we discuss different SANS pen test courses and give you some ideas and some tips so you understand maybe which is the best course for you to take at this given point in your career, in your skill building, in your educational development. We've done other ones in this series, including we had Larry Pesci tell us all about SANS Security 617. That's the wireless pen testing course. We had Mark Baggett tell us about the 573 course. That's on Python for information security professionals. And we've had several others, and there are additional ones planned. Because our goal with this is to give you ideas and tips for maximizing your skill development with respect to SANS classes. So if we could go on to the next slide, please.
Yep.
Thank you, Kevin. All right, so I got to tell you, as an information security practitioner, I love attending SANS courses. And you might say, Ed, you're a SANS instructor. That is true, but I also like to sit in a SANS class. I love to sit in a class by, say, Kevin Fiscus. I learn, I see his techniques, or sit in a class with Josh Wright, or a class from Bryce Galbraith. I learn from all of these folks. And the thing that I like most when I attend SANS classes, yes, I do teach them, but I like attending them because of the SANS promise. If you're not familiar with the SANS promise, here it is in a nutshell. The idea is you will be able to apply what you learned in that SANS classroom the very day you get back to the office. And we really, really focus on that. Every single day of course material is written to make sure it adheres to the SANS promise. But it's not just every single day. We then break the day up and we look at every single module within the class, and then every single lab and every single section. In fact, sometimes I'll be looking at an individual slide and I'll say, does this slide contribute to helping with the SANS promise? Or even a bullet. Should this bullet be on the slide? Is it helping with the SANS promise? So that's cool, but there's over 65 courses to choose from in the SANS arsenal now. Plus there's hosted sessions from other third parties. So which one should you take? And I get asked all the time, which one should I choose? And I always ask people, where are you going in your career? What kind of skills do you need? So, when you get the funding to take a SANS class, it is a tremendous opportunity for you. I mean, SANS classes, whether they're offered in a live training environment, face-to-face, you get to travel somewhere, or maybe even go kind of locally to a live environment for 6 days or more. Or maybe it's offered online and you're taking a class via the on-demand infrastructure, so you get 4 months of access to it. Maybe you're taking it via mentor class, so you meet with a mentor every week or two. Whatever the particular way you're taking the class, you have this tremendous opportunity. You have invested your time and somebody's money, maybe it's your own money, maybe it's your boss's money or your organization's money, and you need to make sure you're getting maximum value out of that. So I'd like to talk with you about how to choose that class so you get the best value for your career. If we can move to the next slide, please. All right, so what should you think about when choosing a SANS class? Well, what's your background and current skill level? Are you very new into information security? If so, you might want to take some of the classes that are at, say, a 400 level, or maybe something like 504, which will get you kind of well-rounded in the various attack strategies. Or maybe you're much more advanced. Maybe you've been doing this for a long time and you've got some great skill sets. You might want to look at 600 level courses. So you got from 400 up to, say, 504. And then you've got the 500 classes. We have a bunch of those. I'll show you some of those later. And then, of course, we have our 600 level classes. And then we have one class that's at the 700 level, very advanced. It's called 760. It's advanced penetration testing and exploit development. So what's your background and current skill level? What do you want to do? Where do you want to move your career? Is it in the direction of network penetration testing? Or maybe it's more into web app penetration testing? Or maybe you're more into mobile? What is it? Or maybe it's not pen testing at all. It could be digital forensics. It could be cyber defense. It could be management. SANS has many different offerings. It could be industrial control systems, ICS. Now we're going to focus here on the penetration testing side of things because we wanted to have some focus for this webcast. Now, what does your boss want you to do? I mean, if your boss is indeed funding this, you need to make sure that you're taking classes that make sense to help further your organization's mission. So what skills are needed to achieve the goals of you and your boss? And I recommend you just actually write out a document that just answers the questions you see on the slide here, because that's how you can go to your boss and make a request to take a SANS class. Now, how important is certification for you? Many of the SANS classes have an associated GX certification. Not all of them do, but many of them do. Some organizations want a tangible measure of whether you've absorbed the material for the class, and the GX certification is that. Other organizations don't focus on that. So it's up to you and your organization of whether a certification is required or not. Now, here's another really important concept. If you're taking a SANS class and you decide, I've made a mistake, I'm not in the right class, SANS is very open to moving you to a different class, one that is more suited to your skill level or more suited to your desired learning objectives. So if you come out to a big SANS event, we've got SANS Fire coming up in a little over a month. SANS Fire is going to be in the Washington, D.C. area, and there's going to be a bunch of classes. I don't know the exact number, maybe Kevin or Jason does, but it's 30 plus classes. And if you find you're not in the right class, hey, we'll move you to another class of your choosing. It's best to make that move though on day one or day two, so that you're able to catch up. If you say, well, gee, I've decided on day 4 of a 6-day class that this one isn't right for me, we could certainly move you, but it might be harder for you to plug into the new class that you're moving to. But anyway, SANS wants to make sure you choose the right class. Here are some tips and questions you should ask yourself to help put you in the right class. But if you find that you've made a mistake, hey, this mistake is correctable. Let's go to the next slide if we could. Now, SANS has a new course roadmap. We rolled this out over the past year or so, and it's really kind of neat. It's very interactive. I told you, there's over 65 classes, so how do you choose one? Well, if you go to www.sans.org/roadmap, easy to remember, you'll see the interactive training roadmap. And the general flows across the page from left to right. You've got core techniques that you see there. And then in the core techniques, we just have 2 classes listed. Security Essentials, that's SANS Security 401, and Hacker Techniques and Incident Handling, that's SANS Security 504. SANS considers these the 2 baseline classes. 401 is focused on the cyber defense topics. 504 is focused on offense so that it can inform defense. All right, so you got 401, Security Essentials, 504, Hacker Techniques. If you then focus on your job role, we split it up, and you can see we've got monitoring and detection. So this is things like blue team and other defensive techniques. We've got penetration testing, which is in beautiful pen test red. And then we have digital forensics and incident response, which has sort of a black color to it. And then I'll expand this for you in just a minute, but if you want to go to even more defined and specific areas, you can move over to section 3, and you'll see here we've got specifics for cyber defense, advanced pen testing, threat hunting and forensics. There's also industrial control systems, secure coding is there as well, and advanced management. Now this is the interactive one at sans.org/roadmap. There's also a static one in PDF if you want that. You can see it at the URL I show you in the lower right. All right, so let's bump over to the next slide. Okay, I want to zoom in now. And if you go on this section 2 here, you'll see it's got focus job roles. And if you hover over it, see, this is dynamic and interactive. Anyway, it tells you, okay, for penetration testing, you know, unlike other training that talks about developing these techniques, SANS is really focused on getting you hands-on skills that you can directly apply. And then if it says here 2 courses. So SANS has 2 courses that it considers just fundamental and essential in penetration testing. If you click on the plus, it will expand it. So Kevin, if we can go to the next slide. Cool. Here you'll see the 2 foundational and fundamental courses that are essential for penetration testing are SANS Security 560, our topic today, and SANS Security 542. One is on the network side, one is on the web app side. So 560 on networks, 542 on web apps. Then of course there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can go to for more specific areas, like 642 for advanced web apps, or if you're into mobile, you've got 575. If you're into wireless, we've got 617, just a whole bunch of stuff there. But we're gonna zoom into this 560. We thought very hard and carefully about this when we put this together and selected what you see as the core techniques on the left-hand side and those 2 classes there. And then this very specific flagship elements of penetration testing in this middle section. And that's where 560 and 542 come out. Kevin, if you can go to the next slide, I'd appreciate it. So if you hover over the 560 thing, it tells you just a summary of the class. And you hover over any one of these things, it'll give you a nice little summary. But the idea of SANS 560 is it's preparing you to conduct high-value penetration testing, covering the whole thing end to end, from planning and scoping through reconnaissance, detailed scanning, exploitation. It's got password attacks and a whole bunch more. There's over 30 labs in the class. And its whole design is to get you ready to do a penetration test that provides really good business value. Let's jump to the next slide. If you were to click on that link that says SEC 560, it takes you directly to the detailed description of the course. So it gives you a nice little summary up at the top. And then we have this list of you will be able to. Now, I've kind of shortened this list because there's a whole bunch of different bullet points, but this is something that you can decide, hey, do I need to be able to build these skills to help me do my job? And can I go to my boss and say, boss, I need these kinds of skills to help me do what you need me to do so I can provide more business value to you. So again, we're trying to help you understand what the course offers, but also direct your career in that direction and also discuss with your boss the way that it'll help you develop those skills. So that's what this whole roadmap is all about. I'm showing you the example here of the SANS Security 560 course. Let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. Now, the SANS 560 course is part of the overall pen test ecosystem. And I wanted to just zoom into the SEC 560 course here. You'll see we've got another class called SEC 460. It's brand new, really cool. It does enterprise threat and vulnerability assessment at scale. So it doesn't get into exploitation, right? Instead, it's vulnerability assessment if you have 100,000 or more machines, right? And then you also see things in here like 542 and 642. But zooming into 560, who takes this course? I tell you, every time I offer the course and I teach it, I say, how many people here are penetration testers or desire to be pen testers? And it's about a third of the hands that go up. And then I'll say, how many people here are cyber defenders and they want to learn more about the offense so they can defend better? And about 1/3 of the hands go up. And then I'll say, how many people here are digital forensics people and you want to better understand the attack so you can better understand your evidence? And about 1/3 of the hands go up there too. So this is not just a course for penetration testers. We have people from across different information security practicing elements, different skill sets, different job functions that do take the 560 course. And the value proposition here for you and for your boss is it covers the most important attack tools. It gets you ready. In fact, we consider it the flagship course on methodology, tools, techniques, and mindset to get you into penetration testing. It covers all this stuff with the idea that offense informs defense. So the key takeaways here are you're trying to derive real business value from your penetration testing, not just checking a box saying, hey, we got a pen test, but instead, how can I make this pen test useful and meaningful in better managing my risk? Because it's all about better understanding your business risk so you can prioritize resources. And as I mentioned before, there's over 30 in-depth technical hands-on labs. And we've invited Kevin Fiscus, who teaches SANS Security 560 a lot. He's a great penetration tester, information security professional, and a great instructor for SANS Security 560. Kevin, can you move to the next slide, please? So I've worked with Kevin for many years, and I love when he teaches the SANS Security 560 course because he provides such really keen insight. And he's also just got such great energy and just fascinating to listen to. So we invited Kevin to come and be part of this webcast and to go through one of his favorite sections from the class. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kevin. Kevin's going to run through this section, maybe take about a half hour or so, and then we're going to open it up to questions and answers. Also, if you have any questions, you can type them in at any time, and Jason Blanchard is going to collate those questions and then ask them of either Kevin or me when we get to the end section. So please ask your questions now or throughout Kevin's presentation. So Kevin, are you ready to go?
I certainly am, Ed. Thank you very much.
Take it away, man. Thank you.
So, awesome, excellent. So I just want to kind of set the stage for what we're going to talk about here. So the section of this class that I'm going to go through actually kicks off about halfway through the second day in class. So prior to this, we've already spent a good portion of the first day talking about really what is a penetration test, how to scope a penetration test, how to define the rules of engagement, and how to report on penetration tests. And I think that that's really, really, really important in that, this isn't a class that just teaches you how to hack. It teaches you how to provide actual business value in the context of a penetration test. So we spent about half a day or so talking about that on day one, and then we move over into activities that attackers and penetration testers can do in order to learn about the target environment, but do so in a way that doesn't really disrupt the target environment. So we refer to different aspects of reconnaissance, where we're trying to learn about the target environment. So that kind of covers the first day. Then we get into day two, and we start talking about scanning. And we're going to spend time talking about how we can identify live hosts on the network. We spend time talking about how we can learn something about the network topology, introducing tools and utilities and concepts like traceroute. We then get into more detailed port scanning, and we illustrate the concepts of port scanning using one of the more common port scanning tools, a tool called Nmap. And so at this point in time in class, we've already covered the basics of Nmap, how to do an Nmap scan, how to learn some basic aspects of it. Well, once we get done with that, we move into more of a discussion of vulnerability scanning. And this is one of the areas where I think this course is really, really, really exciting in that, we teach you the basics of a lot of the tools. We go quite a bit beyond that. So in this case, what we're going to be doing is talking about vulnerability scanning. And we're actually going to be talking about vulnerability scanning in the context of using the Nmap tool to go ahead and execute vulnerability scanning. So that kind of brings us up to what we're talking about now. So now we're at the point where, well, we're going to figure out if we can identify vulnerabilities. And of course, in doing so, there are a lot of different ways in which we attempt to learn or identify a vulnerability. One of those is by understanding something about the version of software that happens to be installed. Now, this could be as simple as connecting up to a host and having that host present a banner back. Welcome to FTP server 1.1.1. Well, if I know that we're running FTP server 1.1.1, then I can do some research. I can identify if there are any vulnerabilities with that particular version of software. So that works really well when you can connect up and interact with a remote system. A variant of that would be looking at different protocols that are supported. In the computing industry, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of protocols that you can run into on a daily basis. And some of those protocols are known to be more vulnerable than others. Some simple examples might be something like SSH. We've got SSH version 1 and SSH version 2, where SSH version 1 is a more vulnerable, a weaker protocol. Another example of a protocol that we might bump into is in a Windows environment, we might look at support for LAN-MAN challenge and response, or NTLM version 1. These protocols, again, are known to be more vulnerable than other protocols that could be used in their place, such as Kerberos or NTLM version 2. So, again, we can identify vulnerabilities by taking a look at what software is installed, what versions of protocols are being used. Another example is just simply checking the config or looking at the behavior of a system. A super simple example of that, and one that I ran into memorably, is something like connecting up to an FTP server to determine whether anonymous FTP is supported. Now, anonymous FTP might not seem like it's all that interesting of something to look for, but I was doing testing a couple of years ago for a fairly large cosmetics company. Turned out that we discovered anonymous FTP was open and supported, and then when we connected up anonymously to their FTP server, by browsing through the directory structure that was presented, we were able to find the formulary or the ingredients for their entire line of cosmetics. In other words, for this particular company, 100% of their core intellectual property was available via anonymous FTP. So sometimes it could be as simple as that. In other cases, we identify vulnerabilities by looking at the configuration of the target system. Now, this ends up getting into an area where we may end up getting access, getting credentials to go ahead and do testing. I am a huge, huge fan of doing credentialed review so that I can actually connect up to a system. And this gets into one of the areas that I generally talk about prior in the class, and that has to do with the fact that many organizations tend to view a penetration test as a duplication or an exact mirror of what the bad guys would do. In reality, there are many, many, many differences between what the bad guys could do as part of their penetration test and what we would do as good guys doing our pen testing. A simple example of that might be, as a bad guy, I might not be opposed to hacking into an employee's home computer for a target company, But as a pen tester, that's most likely going to be out of scope. So there are going to be some differences. So if you can accept the fact that doing penetration testing isn't about proving somebody right, proving somebody wrong, making somebody look good, making somebody look bad. Instead, penetration testing is about trying to improve the overall state of security, going in and doing some credential testing, digging in, looking at the actual configuration of a host is going to be really important. A simple way of looking at this is, for most of the testing that you run into when you connect up to a remote system, you're connecting up to an open port on that remote system. Unfortunately, a lot of vulnerable tools, things like Adobe Reader and Flash Player and Java and Microsoft Office, different types of Office products. I mean, these things have in the past and probably will in the future have vulnerabilities, but because they don't actually listen on an open port, they require some sort of user activity to make that happen. Just doing some basic port connections isn't going to be able to find that type of vulnerability. So looking at it from a credential perspective, actually getting on the box, looking at what's installed there, looking at the versions of what's installed there, how it's been configured, has it been hardened, has it been locked down, that can provide a tremendous amount of value, even if that's not exactly what the bad guys would do. Again, my goal isn't to pretend I'm a bad guy. My goal is to help you make sure that your network gets, or your environment is as secure as possible. Now, another way of identifying vulnerabilities is simply to throw an exploit at it. If I know that you have a certain version of Windows, maybe I didn't detect any specific vulnerabilities, but there's some brand new exploit code that's available for some new vulnerability, something like that. That might be an approach that I'm going to take. Obviously, in doing so, I will have had the conversations with my client or the target organization to make sure that just throwing exploit code is in scope and is within the rules of engagement. It is also important to remember that when you're doing penetration testing, one of the most challenging aspects to doing penetration testing is when things don't work like you'd expect them to work. And the reason why that's challenging is because there's so many different reasons why things can work or not work. For example, if I launch an exploit at a target computer and that exploit fails, well, it might fail because it's just simply not going to work because that computer is not vulnerable to that exploit. It is also possible that it fails because I did something wrong. I configured something wrong. I didn't support the right protocols. A firewall was in the way. Maybe my host-based firewall was turned on, whatever. But it could be that I did something wrong. But exploits don't always work just due to the nature of how they work when they do. You're messing around in a lot of cases with memory, and memory is a very dynamic and crazy place. So there have been times where I have taken a system that I knew for a fact was vulnerable and had an exploit fail 5 or 6 times, and then it turns around and works. So it is important to remember that just because an exploit didn't work once, that doesn't mean that it's never going to work. And it's also important to remember that not all vulnerabilities are exploitable today. But it could be that there is a vulnerability that has no public exploit today, but tomorrow an exploit will be released. And so we've got to keep those things in mind. It's not all about the exploitation. It's all about understanding what the overall business or mission risk happens to be. Now, prior to this point in class, we've spent a lot of time talking about Nmap and some of the basic things it can do in terms of port scanning, in terms of running traceroute to identify the overall topology of the environment, identifying open TCP ports, open UDP ports, identifying the operating system of the target system, and to the extent that there are ports up and running, doing service version detection to try to identify the version of the application or service that's running on those listening ports. And all of those things have the potential of providing us with vulnerability detail. For example, if I know and connect up and find out that you're running Telnet, I know that Telnet's an insecure protocol because it passes data across the network in clear text, including credentials. So just by finding that open port and knowing that it's Telnet on the other side could allow me to uncover a vulnerability. Or by connecting up and getting a banner saying that we're running, as I mentioned before, FTP version whatever, I could identify vulnerabilities from that perspective. The problem that we run into is that with the basic Nmap scanning, we are kind of limited into sort of a stimulus and response. I send a stimulus, I get a response back, I analyze that, and I come back with an answer. But if we want to get into more comprehensive types of testing, where I send some packets, I get a response back, I analyze that response, I conditionally review that response, maybe even sending additional stimulus and waiting for additional response. So we're getting into things that are much more programmatic, that require much more programming logic than what we can do with the basic functionality of Nmap. And that's where something called the Nmap scripting engine comes in. Now, the Nmap scripting engine allows us to effectively build vulnerability scanning scripts into Nessus. The Nmap scripting engine is written in a programming language called Lua, which is kind of interesting. It's used, obviously, in Nmap, but it's also used in a number of games for doing modifications and things like that in games. One notable example for Lua is actually, oddly enough, World of Warcraft. It is a programming language that is pretty simple to look at. It's not a terribly complicated or in-depth programming language, but it can allow us to do lots of really, really cool stuff. You can, when you download a copy of Nmap, it comes with its own set of Nmap scripting engine scripts. And then if you want to, you can create your own. You can modify the scripts that exist. You can go out and find additional scripts that people have put together looking for very specific things. This type of vulnerability scanning is not going to be nearly as detailed or as comprehensive as if you went and used a full-blown vulnerability scanner such as Nessus or Rapid7's Nexpose or BeyondTrust Retina or those types of things. But it is built into Nmap. It could do some really, really cool stuff. And that's what we're ultimately going to be taking a look at. Now, to run the Nmap scripting engine, there are a couple of avenues to make this happen. The first avenue is that we can use --script equals, and then we can specify, either tell it to run all of the scripts, tell it to run certain categories of scripts, all the scripts in a certain directory, or we can specify an individual script that we want it to run. So we have a lot of flexibility there. Now, when it comes to the categories of script, we'll dig into that in just a little bit, but there is a scripts.db file that contains categorization of each individual script. So the scripts, there are a number of categories that we're going to take a look at in just a second. One of those categories is sort of special. It is the default category. Any script that is categorized as default, there's also a couple of shortcuts to be able to run those in place of using --script. So one example of a shortcut is ~S_C. If you run Nmap with ~S_C, it will run all of the scripts that have been categorized as default. It would be the equivalent of saying that you wanted to run all those default scripts. Another shorthand and even shorter hand version is running Nmap with the ~A option. Now, ~A is shorthand, and it actually allows you to run, it's the equivalent of running ~SC to run the default set of scripts. It's also equivalent to running ~SV, ~S_V, which allows me to do service version detection to find out what services are running behind open ports. It's equivalent to running ~O, which is operating system detection. And it's the equivalent of running --traceroute, which also does trace routing. So ~A runs the default set of scripts, does OS detection, does service version detection, and it does traceroute. So it's a simple little shorthand to be able to run a very common set of Nmap options. Now, some of the scripts that you have, some of the scripts do require some input. In those cases, the input can be submitted into the script using --scripts-args, and then you pass that input in there. We also can increase the output from the scripts as well as get help functionality for those scripts as well. Now, the categories, there are a number of different categories for these different scripts. Now, it is important to remember that, or to know that, each individual script is going to be assigned to one or more categories. So the categories aren't, individual. It's not a one category per script. You can actually have scripts with multiple categories. So we have categories that are talking about testing for authentication issues, doing broadcast type discovery. In other words, sending out broadcast packets and looking for responses to come back in to try to interrogate a large environment with a smaller number of packets. We've got brute force authentication stuff. You do need to be careful of that so that you don't run into an issue with account lockout. Make sure that stuff is in scope when you do your pen test. Things like discovery, let me learn about the target environment. When we talk about DOS, these are scripts that have the potential of causing a denial of service condition, so you need to be careful with those. The category of scripts that are categorized as exploit are actually going to take advantage of a vulnerability, try to actually do exploitation of that. Any external category scripts, those things are going to be scripts that are going to send data to a third party. Now, whether sending data to a third party is a big deal or not is going to depend upon your specific penetration test. If the organization you're doing a penetration test for is okay with submitting some information to a third party, then the external categories might allow you to learn something about your target. But not all pen tests are going to allow that, so we need to keep that in mind as we go through it. There are fuzzing categories where you're actually sending large amounts of sort of pseudo-random or deterministic data. You're just throwing a lot of data at certain fields or certain protocols to see if we can discover maybe some new vulnerabilities, something along those lines. Intrusive scripts are those that are likely going to leave some sort of residue on the target system. So if your penetration test, if part of the goal of your penetration test is to remain undetected, you may want to shy away from some of those intrusive scripts. Or if you're doing more red team type exercises and you're trying to test the blue team or the defenders, you may actually want to do some of the intrusive stuff to make sure that they can detect that, or at least point them in the direction to improve their skill sets. Malware scripts are looking for malware that may already be on the system. Things that are defined with a category of safe. This one's a little bit important to focus on. So when it says safe, that doesn't necessarily mean it will never cause a problem. Anytime you throw lots of packets at a target environment, there is always the chance of having something unexpected happen. I've gone through and I've unlocked every door in a hospital with a simple Nmap scan because the door locking system was IP enabled, and we threw a bunch of packets at it. It, let's just say, had a bit of a hiccup. So the safe stuff are generally not going to cause problems, but that doesn't mean they absolutely can't. So just keep that in mind. Version is, of course, looking for version stuff, trying to identify the version of something going on in a remote system. Vulnerabilities is kind of straight up vulnerability scanning type categories. And then default. Default are those categories that are going to run when you run Nmap with the -A option, or when you run it with the -C option, or if you specify you want default categories. Now the scripts are in a file, or the script categorization resides in a file called script.db. That file has basically a big long list of all the scripts, and then the different categories that those scripts fall into, which means that it's just a big text-based file. So as you're doing penetration testing, if you discover some additional scripts that you want to run all the time, you could just simply add a categorization of default and being able to take a look at or have that run when you run -A or -SC. There are a lot of these scripts that are built into there. Dozens and dozens of these scripts that can do all kinds of different things. Whether if it's looking at the robots.txt file to find out if we could do something interesting there, finding out what version of SSH is going to be used, finding out if we can do DNS zone transfers. We can set up and look for configuration errors on mail servers, all kinds of cool stuff. And again, it's just an issue of figuring out which scripts do you want to run and then practicing and making sure you have the capability of running all those. So what I wanted to do is at this point in time in class, we would then open the door up to discuss or to go through a little lab. And this is a lab using the Nmap scripting engine. Now, I'm not going to go through every single step of this lab because some of the steps are just sort of like look around here, but I do want to highlight some of the main pieces and main objectives as we go through this. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to drop out of the presentation here for just a second, and I'm going to pop over into the Linux distribution that we provide in class to students. So if you take the 560 class, you end up getting a Linux distribution that is preloaded with a number of tools and utilities and all that kind of fun stuff. And so what I wanted to do was first and foremost show you the script.db file that we mentioned before. And so here you can see this file. All I've done is just displayed it, in this case in gedit. And you can see the individual names of these scripts, all these .nfe things. So we can see these different names, and then you can see the various categories that the scripts have been assigned to. So if you look, for example, at the second one down, address-info.nfe, that particular script is categorized as both default and safe. So that script would run with the Nmap with the -A or -SC. Now the top entry, the ACARSD -info.nsc, that guy has categories of discovery and safe. So while it's not likely to cause a problem, it's also not going to be something that's run with the default set of scripts. So you can play around with this stuff as you need to. You can adjust these if you find that necessary to do so. So there's a lot of, and if you wanted to add in additional scripts, you could do that as well. Now, as we take a look at these, we can look at a couple of these categories that happen to be there. I'm just going to pop over to a terminal window, if I can actually make my mouse work properly. So if I go in and I do, let me just actually think I got a different window here. Here we go. Whoops. Sorry about that. So here, if I go in here and I do like I'm just going to do, I'm going to look in the script.db file. So I'm catting the script.db file, and I'm grepping for some different keywords. So if I grep for default, when I go run through, there are 101 lines in this file that have default in them. So from that perspective, when you run Nmap with -A, you're going to run 101 different scripts. If I go ahead and I put something like, I don't know, if I do intrusive, there are 173 different scripts with intrusive as a category. So we can go through and we can dig through and identify a variety of scripts based on categorization. We can obviously modify that stuff should we want to as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and give this a little shot here. Let's just make sure I'm in the right directory. Cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this we're going to run Nmap. The -n that I'm running is basically telling it not to do reverse DNS lookups or DNS. I don't have a DNS server in this environment, so I'm telling it not to do DNS lookups. And then I'm going to do -- script equals. And in this case, we're going to run a script HTTP robots.txt.nfe. So this is basically just a script that's going to look for a robots.txt file. And I'm going to run that against one of the lab systems that we use for the 560 class. This one happens to be a Linux box that's running a web server. And I'm going to tell it I only want it to scan port 80. And when I go through and do that, I can see very quickly that port 80 is open, and I can see that there are 4 disallowed entries in the robots.txt file, /images/CGI bin, stuff folder, personal thread files, and then another thing called sensitive stuff. As a pen tester, it's always a good idea to identify if you have, if there's a robots.txt file, because that could give you something really interesting. I was actually doing testing with a colleague of mine, and we bumped into a robots.txt file on a web application. It turned out that one of the disallowed entries was a /admin. So we, of course, went to www.something.com/admin, and were prompted with a username and password. Well, it turned out on this particular website, we could do a fairly simple SQL injection attack where in place of the password, we put some SQL code that it was an always true statement. So for the more technically, the web app folks out there, was basically just doing a single quote space or 1 equals 1 semicolon dash dash. What we're basically saying there is, if the stored password matches the provided password, then grant access. So what we did is basically say if the stored password is blank, or if 1 equals 1, then provide access to the system. Well, it turned out that worked, and we had full administrative access to this web application. Well, we could have changed any aspect we wanted to the web application. In addition to that, this was an e-commerce web application, and we had the ability to change, modify, delete, or add merchant accounts. So in theory, if I was a bad guy, I could have actually deleted all of the merchant accounts and then just simply sent all those transactions to a computer that I controlled to get all that credit card data should I want to. We also found that there was another tab in this admin console of this application that allowed us to add administrative users. And we were able to see the 4 administrative users that had already been added to this site. And it turned out that their passwords were displayed in the application in clear text. So we had full administrative access to everything with or without passwords, and we had clear text passwords. Well, it turned out that the client we were actually working for didn't build this application in-house. They actually used a third party to do it, and this same exact template was used on a few thousand other sites. So simply by identifying that robots.txt file, identifying a disallowed entry, we ended up finding a fairly significant vulnerability that not only affected our client, but also affected a whole bunch of other folks. So really, really handy in being able to go and identify even some basic things like a robots.txt file. So really, really handy, really nice thing to be able to do. Now, I'll give you another example. In this case, we're going to interact with a Windows environment. So in this case, we're going to run Nmap again, but instead of running, the same script, we're going to change this script to make it the nbstat.nfe. Now, nbstat is very similar to, for those of you who do a lot of work in Windows, there's a Windows command called nbtstat. And that's basically the same kind of thing that we're looking at here. In this case, we're not going to do that against that same Linux box we did it before, but we're actually going to go run that against a Windows computer, 10.10.10.10. So we're running the script nbstat. And as we run it, it's going to communicate with that. And what we ultimately got back here, as you can see, is that there are a bunch of ports that happen to be open. We can see that port 25, port 42, port 80, 135, 139, 445 are all open. A bunch of these high number ports are also open, possibly for some remote procedure call type stuff. And then we also see down at the bottom the host script results, nbstat. The net BIOS name is Trinity. Now, we also get the MAC address as well. Now, knowing that net BIOS name is Trinity is going to be really handy because there are some additional types of techniques that we can use, particularly when we're trying to, query information about remote systems, maybe even try to get some information about user accounts. I may need to interact with that system using that name. So now we have a name that we can then use for additional attacks or additional attack vectors as we go through it. Now, the next one that I wanted to show you, or in kind of the last piece of this particular lab that I wanted to run through, is really illustrating something that I think is incredibly important about the Security 560 class. In this class, we try to not only show you how stuff works, but we also try to show you some of the things that can get in the way, some of the problems that you could run into, some of the challenges you can overcome, and how you can go ahead and do that. So what we've done in this particular case is, and what I've done on my system is I have modified the SSH daemon on my system so that it is, instead of listening on port 22, which would be the normal port, it's going to listen on port 23, which is normally associated with SSH, or with Telnet, I should say. Now, if we go look, I'm actually going to be running an SSH version 1 checking script. So that's the one that I'm actually going to run. And if you look down here where it says port rule that I've just highlighted, it says port rule equals short port dot port underscore or service. So what it's saying is, for this particular test to run, Nmap has to identify that it's either communicating with port 22 or that it has been identified as SSH. If we don't see port 22 and we don't see SSH, then this particular script will not run. Now, if I go here, and I'm actually going to run Nmap, we'll just do it this way. Oops, sorry. So I'm going to run Nmap, and I'm running it against my own computer because that's the computer that I've made the modifications on. And ultimately, I'm just running this with kind of default options. And notice what it says. It says port 23 is open, and it also says that it's running Telnet. So we'll just kind of keep that off to the side just for a second. But notice it says 23 is open and it's running Telnet. So if I want to then go ahead and run my script, I can run the exact same command, just the same basic script that I ran before, but this time I'm going to do -- script equals, and the script we're going to run is sshv1.nfe. Now, when I go ahead and run this, it turns out that the script didn't run at all. I told it to run, but it didn't. The reason why it didn't run is because, as we saw before, Nmap did not see port 22, and it did not see SSH. It saw port 23 in Telnet. That's because, by default, Nmap looks at an nmap-services file, and it just simply says, all right, if I see 23, it's going to be Telnet. If I see 22, it's going to be SSH. If I see 21, it's going to be FTP. If I see 80, it's going to be HTTP. It just has a static mapping. But Nmap can also run with a couple of other command line switches. So if I wanted to do this a little bit more detail, what I would do is I would run Nmap. Now I could just do -A. -A will run service version detection, operating system detection, run default set of scripts, as well as do trace routes. But I'm going to just kind of be a little bit more specific. I'm just going to tell it to do -O, which is OS detection, and I'm going to have it do -SV, service version detection. I'm not going to have it do SC because I just want to run the one script that I want to do here, and I don't really care about trace route at this point. Now, when I go run this again, hopefully it'll finish relatively quickly because it's doing a little bit more. But notice what we see here. So as I go through, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so that we can kind of dig in. But as we can see, we get a lot more output in here. And notice up here where it says port 23, it's definitely port 23. But instead of just being port 23 Telnet, just using the data in the nmap-services file, it's now going to do port 23 SSH. And because it identified SSH, it then went and did more of that version, the SSH version scanning type stuff. So I think this is a really, really, really important thing because while it is, it's cool to know if you do -- script equals or -SC, it's cool to know that you can run those awesome scripts that are built into Nmap. But I think that it's really, really, really important to understand what you need to do to make that happen. There is a reason that -A involves running scripts, but it also involves doing OS detection and service version detection because a large percentage of the scripts that are available are going to be dependent upon correctly identifying the operating system and or correctly identifying the version of the service that's going to be involved. So for that kind of stuff, it is really important when you run Nmap and you do that service version detection, you do the operating system detection in conjunction with running the various scripts. If you fail to do that, everything's going to look fine. It's going to look like Nmap did exactly what it was supposed to do, but it did. It just didn't do what you wanted it to. So it's really important to be able to take a look and to understand that Nmap does have certain dependencies, and getting in and understanding how it works and going into a good deal of depth is going to make you a much, much, much better, much more effective penetration tester. So ultimately, that's kind of the overview of this particular lab that I wanted to go through. And I guess I'll kind of turn things back over to the other cast of characters that we have. I think that we'll have have some time for questions and all that kind of fun stuff. But I'll turn stuff back over to Ed and Jason and Debbie.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate it. Great job, Kevin. Very, very good stuff. I tell you, I was talking to John Strand, and for those of you that don't know, John is an amazing guy, founder of Black Hills Information Security, and avid pen tester. He also teaches the SANS 504 class a lot. He told me that one of his favorite labs in 560 is the lab you just covered. And what he really likes is the example that we do where you move the SSH to a different port. Because it really does hammer home. He says, I like that lab because it shows not only how things work, but also shows you how they don't work, or at least how you could make a mistake with it so that it hammers home, don't make this mistake. So do the versioning when you do the script scanning, because it gives the scripts much more information. And that made me happy that John liked it so much. So in conclusion here, and then we'll move it over to Jason with questions and answers. If you still can't decide what SANS course is the right one for you, ask for help. There's numerous GIAC and SANS mailing lists that you can ask your fellow students and participants in the SANS community about what classes they've taken and what they think. There's usually very lively discussions about that. In fact, we have one for the SANS pen test classes. It's a mailing list called the GPONE mailing list, and it's at the URL that you see here on the slide. You're welcome to join. It's a lively discussion. I lightly moderate it, but we get some really good input from penetration testers all around the world. Or you can contact your friendly neighborhood SANS instructor or curriculum lead. Someone like me, I'm the curriculum lead for pen testing. We have many different SANS instructors. Perhaps you know some of them. Certainly you know now Kevin Fiscus. The bottom line here is we want your SANS experience to really be excellent, and for you to get the most out of this. I'd really like to thank you for your time. I'd like to thank Kevin for going through that example for us. Maybe we can move on to the next slide. And the next slide, we're going to open things up for our Q&A. So Jason, are you ready to take it away?
Yeah, I got a couple questions here for you, Ed. The first question is there any difference between the live training for the 560 course and the online version?
So we try to make them as close as possible as they can be together. I will tell you this, it's the same material, it's the same slides, it's the same discussion, it's the same labs. The difference is, obviously, the on-demand version of it doesn't require travel. And you get 4 months of access to the target environment. Whereas for the face-to-face class, the one that you're taking live, that's a 6-day course, and you do have to travel there. But besides that, we try to make them as close as they can be to each other. For the on-demand class, I am the voice of that class. They record me teaching it, and then that's what they play. But we also have some additional little animations and such to kind of bring it more to life. But they're virtually identical, just different timing.
And I just want to make a comment that the on-demand version also has subject matter experts in case anyone has a question.
That's right. So yeah, they're essentially like a virtual teaching assistant. So you can email them or get into chat with them, and they will help you if you have any questions about the material or questions about the labs. They're really tremendous. I know the subject matter experts that work on 560, and they are some exceptional information security practitioners. I'm honestly, you could say, Ed, you're biased, but the truth is I'm really proud of them. They do a great job.
Ed, for people who haven't played NetWars before, if they're going to a live event that has NetWars, do you have any recommendations for a good way for them to get started?
Yes, do it. Some people say, it's some SANS events, not all of them. It's usually the large ones and some of the bigger medium ones. We run SANS NetWars events. Usually it's on night 4 and night 5 of the 6-day classes. And some people say, I don't know if I'm ready for it. I don't know if I've never done this kind of thing before. Just do it. Just have fun. We dim the lights. We play some music. We have some refreshments and chips. You really, really should. It gives you an additional 3 hours each night for 2 nights. So that's 6 hours of additional hands-on materials. It is it's more lab stuff, but it's also done in a very fun kind of capture the flag environment. And we have many different versions of NetWars. There's core NetWars, which is multidisciplinary. It's got things like penetration testing and vulnerability assessment and digital forensics and cyber defense all rolled together. And then we have cyber defense NetWars, which focuses on the defense. And we have DFIR NetWars, focuses on digital forensics and incident response. And at certain events, we have an ICS NetWars, which is industrial control systems. So there's lots of different flavors of NetWars. I'd like to encourage you to do it. Don't be intimidated. Many of the versions of NetWars allow you to play as a team. So Jason specifically asked, what's my advice to you? If you feel like, hey, maybe I'm not up to it, go as part of a team. Make friends. One of the big parts of the SANS experience is becoming part of the community and networking. So make some friends. We allow teams up to 5 people. If you only got a team of 2 or 3, if you have no team, just show up. There might be a team that you can join. We are working on some new things here where we're going to do a night before NetWars, where we're going to have people who are new to NetWars just come together, and maybe we'll do team formation and kind of get you introduced to the concept. I asked Jason to put together a thing for coming up at SANS Fire, where we're going to do that sort of intro to NetWars on night 3. Jason, are we doing that?
We're working on that now, Ed.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. So cool. Yeah, we love NetWars. The students seem to really like it, and it makes me so happy. I'm the director of the NetWars project for SANS, and it's really taken off.
And final question is for Kevin. Kevin, if someone is in the class and let's say they're going through the labs and they're struggling to understand the concept, what is there to help walk them through so that they can grasp what they're learning in the labs?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I guess the long and short of that one is, at least for my classes, me. For Ed's classes, Ed. Oftentimes for larger classes, we actually have a couple of people in the classroom that are there to help students walk through the labs, to help them solve problems. In all honesty, I kind of look at my primary job is, let's face it, we provide students with books, we provide students with the material, they can read that stuff. The limitation of just getting something and reading it is you don't have the ability to ask clarifying questions. You don't have the ability, when something's just not presented in a way that's clicking for you, to get somebody to present it in a different way, to kind of spin things around, to kind of walk you through it, to make sure that it clicks. And that's really, at least in my opinion, one of the primary goals or roles for the instructor in the classroom is, these are very hands-on labs. And we want to make sure that everybody is getting everything out of them. So just simply, I always kind of make the joke, you raise your hand. If for whatever reason I'm not paying attention, throw something at me as long as it's not heavy, sharp, or wet. And, I will do everything that I can, obviously with the time constraints that we have, but I'm also in class usually about a half an hour early. And I will also stay late. We have breaks so we can go through things. So the best thing to do if you're in class and you're running into a problem, first of all, raise your hand and ask the question. If a certain person has a question, it is highly likely that there's 3 other people in the class that have thought about the same thing. So raise your hand, ask the question, at least and that will give the entire class the benefit of getting that answer, which is probably going to help a lot of people out. Or just while you're doing the labs, while you're doing the the hands-on piece of it, raise your hand, get my attention. I'll come over and I will sit down and we'll go through it. I'll make sure that everybody has that experience that they need to get. The best thing to do, get the instructor's attention, or if there are other like teachers' aides or other folks in the class that are helping out, get their attention and they will be able to help you.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin. And Ed, do you have any final words? And then Kevin, you final words, and then we're done.
Sure. Hey, the pen test industry, we talked about this during our banter before this webcast started. Penetration testing it's growing by leaps and bounds. I've been doing penetration testing for many years, and I've never seen so many opportunities for pen testing. Whether you're working inside an organization and want to pen test your own employer, or whether you want to move to a third-party pen test company, or you're in such a company now, there's just so many opportunities there. It is great to be a pen tester. And me and my friends have done it, and I just really enjoy the opportunity. Sometimes I think about talking to 10-year-old me, 10-year-old Eddie Skoudis. I went by Eddie back in those days. And I think about telling that kid, someday you're going to grow up and people will pay you to hack them. Now that sounds a little weird, right? And then I'll say to 10-year-old Eddie, I'll say, and they're going to love it, and they're going to thank you for helping improve their security. And that's just a beautiful thing. So anyway, it is a wonderful opportunity to be a pen tester, and I'm thankful every single day that I get an opportunity to do that and to share this with SANS students through classes like the SANS 560 course. And I'll turn it over to Kevin Fiscus.
Thanks, Ed. So I absolutely second 100% of what Ed just said. It is a fantastic place to be. I mean, I was not blessed with the physical characteristics to be able to go play a professional sport, but I consider this sort of be the next best thing, right? I get to get paid to do what I absolutely love to do. But I'll kind of add one more thing to it as well. There are a lot of classes, a lot of books, a lot of resources out there that talk about teaching you how to hack. And I've been asked by countless students, how does this class compare to something? Insert competitive certification or whatever here. And one of the things that I've found that I think really, really is important from the Security 560, what we bring to the table is we don't teach you how to hack. That's part of it, but we teach you how to do a penetration test. A good portion of the first day is all spent making sure that you have the ability to define what the penetration test is going to be, that you have the ability to discuss scoping and rules of engagement, and you have the ability to generate a report that is going to be meaningful and actionable and provide business value to people. And the way that I like to put it in class, and I kind of overstate it, but I don't think it's by much, is to say you could be the best hacker in the world, but if you do a bad job of planning, scoping, defining rules of engagement of the pen test, and or if you do a bad job in reporting your results, then you are not a good penetration tester. And there are a lot of people out there that can do a good job of just hacking stuff. But what we try to do is to make sure that people can actually be good penetration testers, not just good hackers. And I think that's a huge differentiator for this class, is that you walk away knowing how to use all the tools, knowing how to use all the techniques, knowing how to go hack stuff, but you can do it in a way that provides actionable business or mission value. And that, to me, is the most important thing.
Awesome. Thank you both for the presentation today. And Debbie, I'm going to turn it over to you to conclude today's.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Ed and Kevin, for your presentations. And to our audience, we appreciate your listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. You can find your CEUs for all completed webcasts, including this one, by logging into your SANS portal account. Navigate to your account dashboard, then click My Webcasts, and you can then download your CEU on the right-hand side of the web page. And until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.